You're born in 1982 and you don't fit anywhere. Too young to remember the Cold War ending. Too old to have grown up with Instagram. When someone mentions millennials, you think of TikTok trends and participation trophies, and you feel nothing. That's not you. When they talk about Gen X, you picture grunge and latchkey kids coming home to empty houses, and that's not quite right either. You exist in a gap that nobody named until recently, and what happened to you in that gap created a psychology researchers are only now beginning to understand. They call you Xennials now, born between 1980 and 1985, the microgeneration that straddled two incompatible worlds. You had a childhood without the internet, then became a teenager the moment it arrived. You remember memorizing phone numbers because there was no other option. You recorded songs off the radio onto blank cassettes. You knew what it meant to be genuinely unreachable for hours at a time, and then suddenly, at 15 or 16, AOL installed itself over your phone line with that screeching dial-up sound, and everything shifted. But here's what makes your cohort different from every group that came before or after. You didn't just witness the transition from analog to digital. You lived it during the exact years when your brain was forming its foundational understanding of how the world works. When identity solidifies, when you figure out who you are before anyone else gets a vote, that timing created something specific in your psychology. Something that shows up in how you handle stress, how you approach work, how you think about money, and why you feel perpetually caught between two generations that don't quite recognize you as one of their own. Most of you were somewhere between 5 and 20 years old on September 11th, 2001, old enough to understand what was happening, young enough for it to rewire your sense of security permanently. The Oklahoma City bombing in 1995, Columbine in 1999, then the towers. For many in your cohort, these weren't just news events. They were your first real introduction to the concepts of violence, death, and chaos on a national scale. The world felt fundamentally unsafe in a way it hadn't before, and that fear didn't go away. It settled into your nervous system and stayed there. Then came the financial crisis. You graduated college between 2003 and 2008, walking directly into either the aftermath of the dot-com collapse or straight into the teeth of the Great Recession. The timing couldn't have been worse. Student debt ballooning, entry-level jobs disappearing, the entire economy restructuring itself precisely when you were supposed to be building the foundation of your adult life. And the data shows something stark. By 2016, families headed by early millennials had wealth levels 34% below where economists predicted they'd be if the 2008 crisis hadn't occurred. Not a temporary setback, a permanent recalibration that followed you for over a decade. The average college degree cost you $104,480 in 2016, double what it cost in 1989 when adjusted for inflation. Meanwhile, wages increased by only $5,000 per year during that same period. You took on an average of $32,911 in student loan debt, and half of you delayed major life decisions because of it. Marriage, home ownership, starting families. Not because you didn't want those things, but because the math simply didn't work. Your parents bought their first home in their mid-20s. You were still renting at 32, watching housing prices climb further out of reach every year while your debt stayed exactly where it was. But the financial pressure is only part of what shaped you. There's something happening beneath that, something in how your brain developed during those specific years of transition. The research on your cohort reveals patterns that don't show up in the generations on either side of you. Patterns in how you process uncertainty, how you form attachments to employers, how you handle technology, and why your mental health statistics look different from both Gen X and younger millennials. What happened to your psychology during those formative years created adults who are simultaneously more anxious and more adaptable than the generations surrounding them. And the reasons why start with understanding what it actually meant to grow up in two different worlds at once. You grew up during what psychologists call a critical window. Between ages 10 and 25, your brain was actively constructing its framework for processing risk, stability, and trust in systems. And what was happening in the world during your critical window? Institutions collapsing, the economy imploding, national trauma on repeat. Your nervous system learned to expect disruption as the baseline, not the exception. That shows up now in ways you might not connect. The anxiety that never fully leaves, the constant low-level vigilance, the inability to fully relax, even when things are objectively fine. 12% of early millennials have been diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. That's double the rate of boomers. Since 2014, major depression in your cohort has increased 43%. Between 2007 and 2017, the suicide rate climbed 35%. These aren't personality flaws, they're the psychological residue of growing up when the ground kept shifting beneath you. But there's another layer here that doesn't get discussed enough. The parenting you received, most of you experienced what researchers call helicopter parenting. Parents hovering overhead, controlling and perfecting every aspect of your lives. That created adults who crave praise at work more than other generations, who value meaningful work and learning opportunities, who prioritize work-life balance in ways that confuse employers from older cohorts. Your relationship with work is fundamentally different. You're committed when you're fulfilled, but commitment isn't loyalty. You're not staying somewhere just because in 2008, 75% of early millennials expected to have 2 to 5 employers in their lifetime. By the time the recession hit, that dropped to 54%, and over a quarter of you now expect 6 employers or more. You change jobs every 3 years on average, which older generations interpret as flakiness, but is actually pragmatic adaptation to an economy that taught you early that no employer is looking out for you long term. And now, as parents yourselves, you're actively rejecting the helicopter model. 87% of millennial parents say parenting is their most important job, and many are sacrificing career advancement to prioritize their children's contentment. You're pushing back on traditional education expectations, celebrating individuality, supporting different lifestyle choices in ways previous generations wouldn't have considered. What's emerging is a generation that's both wounded and resilient. You carry higher rates of anxiety and depression than the generations around you, but you also possess something they don't. You remember what life looked like before constant connectivity, which means you can still disconnect when you need to. You value authenticity because your identity formed before social media turned selfhood into performance. You understand patience because you lived in a world where waiting was normal, not an inconvenience to be optimized away. The diversity of your cohort shaped you too. Your birth years coincided with increased immigration from Latin America and Asia. You grew up in a less homogeneous culture than your parents, which created more open attitudes toward difference. You're the first truly globalized generation, coming of age as the internet erased geographic boundaries and connected you to perspectives far beyond your immediate surroundings. You're not confused about who you are. You're navigating a reality that demands fluency in 2 incompatible systems simultaneously. The analog world that raised you taught presence, patience, and building identity in private. The digital world you adopted as an adult demands constant visibility, instant response, and performed authenticity. Most people only know one system. You know both, and you're exhausted from translating between them. The label doesn't matter. Xennial, elder millennial, the Oregon Trail generation. What matters is understanding that the timing of your formative years created psychological patterns that are distinct, measurable, and entirely rational, given what you lived through. You're not broken. You're adapted to conditions that would have destabilized anyone. The world changed while you were building yourself, and instead of shattering, you learned to hold both realities at once. That's not weakness. That's exactly the kind of resilience the research says emerges from navigating between fundamentally different environments. You didn't get the clean story other generations received. What you got was the ability to function when the ground shifts because you've been doing it your entire life. You're in your late 30s or early 40s now. You've spent 2 decades watching younger generations discover problems you've been quietly managing since college. You've watched older generations insist the solutions that worked for them should still work now. And you're standing in the middle, fluent in both languages, belonging fully to neither camp. The research finally has language for what you are, a cohort shaped by timing, not personality. Adults built at the hinge point between 2 incompatible eras. You carry the psychological weight of that position, the anxiety and the financial scars and the delayed milestones. But you also carry the cognitive flexibility that comes from learning 2 systems instead of 1, the ability to be present in a world that demands performance, the capacity to disconnect in an age of constant reach, the resilience that develops when the ground shifts beneath you repeatedly and you keep standing anyway. Nobody's writing think pieces about Xennials. You don't get the cultural attention Gen Z commands or the stereotypes millennials can't escape. You exist in the gap, And maybe that's exactly where you were always supposed to be, translating between worlds, holding contradictions, functioning without needing the validation of a clean generational narrative. You figured out who you were before anyone was watching. That's not something you lost. That's something no generation after you will ever have the chance to build.